Okay. Once again, this is the Kansas 4-H Animal Science webinar. We are going to get started with this series again and plan to post videos and host live Zooms, live webinars on a more regular basis. This month we have a timely topic as we wrap up from county fair season and begin the new 4-H year. I am Kelsey Nordyke. I'm your Southeast Region 4-H specialist, and I'm also the Kansas 4-H Ag Science specialist. Welcome to those of you who are able to join us. We will tell you that tonight's session is being recorded and it will be posted on the Kansas 4-H Animal Sciences webpage. So if you would like to go back and watch that at a later time, you're welcome to do so. In addition to that, all of our previous sessions that we've had are also posted on that page. They're very informative and provide information on a variety of our animal science related projects that should be helpful to our beginners as well as those who are seasoned 4-Hers. Tonight's topic, I believe, will be especially helpful to both our 4-Hers as well as their parents. We are going to talk about carcass contests. So throughout tonight's presentation, you are welcome to ask questions, but we're going to wait until the end of Dr. Byer's presentation in order to ask those questions. So you can put those into the chat as we go, or you can hold on to your questions and ask them at the end. Once again, if you'll keep your microphones muted and your videos turned off, that just helps to conserve the bandwidth and helps for everything to run more smoothly. I would like to introduce to you Dr. Aaron Byer. Dr. Byer is the Extension Meat Specialist with the Department of Animal Science with Kansas State University. We're excited to collaborate with her on a variety of things. Dr. Byer was an instrumental part of the meat judging contest at Livestock Sweepstakes, and she is an instrumental part of our all-star meat team for the 4-H division and has been working with them, and her graduate students have been working with them to prepare them for the national contest, which is coming up very soon. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Byer. And if you all have questions, be sure to add them in the chat as we go.
Thank you for having me. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Okay, let me share my screen really quick. Okay. Perfect. So today we are going to be talking about pricing in general, but focusing a little bit more on beef and the other species. And I'll go into kind of the high points of all of the red meat species, but beef is the most intricate in terms of the marketing strategy. So we'll go into a few of those components that tie into pricing. And please feel free at the end, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I'm trying to give a pretty high level explanation in terms of all the different factors that play into the carcass pricing. It is a little bit complicated. So if you want me to go into more details or provide any extra information, I am happy to answer questions now and or later. And like Kelsey mentioned, my name is Erin. I am a recent addition here to the K-State family in terms of being on faculty, but I did get my PhD here. So this is my 4th year in Manhattan, and I'm happy to be back at K-State. I have been involved a lot with meat judging. So that's my big background in terms of carcass grading and pricing, which really helps me to be able to talk about things like this. However, it is also relevant. So I'll talk about a little bit about the background into everything that goes into pricing and where I find information whenever I am officiating a carcass contest. So a little bit about each species. They are different in nature, and talking about lambs first. So when we are pricing lamb carcasses, that's going to be based off of cuttability / maturity. So we have different classes of lamb, either lamb or mutton. And then everything else though is all cuttability. And what I mean by cuttability is the amount of usable product on that carcass. And determining cuttability is different for each species, but just in general, how much usable product does that carcass have? and the most to the least, and that is how we're going to assign value. For lambs in particular, we use formulas that really just measure the amount how trim those carcasses are. We know that American consumers and other consumers really do not like lamb fat, the flavor of lamb fat. Well, it might not be everyone's favorite lamb or fat flavor. So that yield grade equation, which we'll talk about yield grading as it relates to beef today, but they're pretty similar formulas. It just uses factors that evaluate trimness, because that is kind of what drives the lamb market. Beef is the most complicated. So we not only measure yield and cuttability, which again is the amount of usable product off of that carcass, but also quality. So we're going to go into quality. That's what makes this conversation a little bit more complicated today. So I'll go into all the different factors and how we determine quality grades, how we determine yield grades, how those impact that final price, which is way more intricate than just weight, right? And I think maybe weight is something that can drive some pricing conversations, but it's much more important for us to be talking about things like yield grading and quality grading, because that's what impacts value back to the producer, and it's also what impacts that overall eating experience for the consumer. Pork is another one that we do a lot with carcass contests, and we just measure really fat-free lean, which is a fancy way of saying cuttability. So quality is important for our export market. So we send a lot of our pork outside of the United States, and as we do so, those markets really want high quality pork, but within domestic or US pork, we do not have different pricing incentives for different quality parameters like we do for beef. And I can go a little bit into that on the next slide. So whenever we are pricing out pork, we use a formula called percent fat-free lean, which is just measuring how heavy muscled is that carcass, how trim is that carcass, what's the percent of that total weight that can be used at retail, that can be used within the food market. And that's we basically place or assign a price for that carcass based off of the larger percentage, basically the better. So for today, we're going to primarily, lost my clicker, on beef. And beef's just the one that's a little bit different than the other two species. And I'm happy to provide more information about the other two. But beef is the most expensive out of the three, right? And we can give pros and cons for all three species. Pork is consistent, it has an affordable price. Lamb is kind of a niche market. Beef, however, is more or less the favorite for American consumers, but it is the most expensive. And it can be the most expensive because it is the favorite in the center of the plate because of the overall eating experience. So consumers want to continue to eat beef. Beef is probably, at least for me, a nice ribeye steak cooked to a medium rare degree of doneness is my favorite. It's one of my favorite things to eat, especially from a protein standpoint. And that's pretty consistent across the board for people who live in the US. So we can get away with a higher price because of different parameters that are very unique to beef. And that is really the flavor. So whenever you think about that nice juicy steak, I think the first thing that comes to mind is flavor. I did a presentation 2 weeks ago with students, and I fed them different cuts of beef, different degrees of doneness of beef. And before that, I asked them, what do you want? What's your perfect steak? And the first thing they mentioned was, we want it to taste good. We want the flavor to be what we want. So the flavor is pretty unique to beef, and that is highly dictated by some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. The flavor, the juiciness, the tenderness, those are what we consider the pillars of that eating experience, or how much you enjoy eating that steak. And those are all really important as we talk about carcass quality. When we think about pricing, it impacts two different sectors. That money goes back to the producer, but those higher quality carcasses that the consumers want to eat, that you want to buy at retail, that your parents want to buy at retail, whoever's purchasing the product, those are going to be worth more. So the better eating experience, the more they're worth. Therefore, the more money they can make in the packing plant, and the more money that can be sent back to the producer. So really what the consumer wants at retail really has this nice downstream effect back to carcass pricing in the packing plant. And that is because within beef, we have a huge variation of eating experience. We can have one of the best prime steaks, amazing eating experience. It's tender, it's juicy, it has amazing flavor on a prime carcass, all the way down to lower quality, maybe if some other issues, older carcass, that's not the best eating experience, and we have to discount that carcass because consumers aren't going to want to spend as much money on that versus the first steak I mentioned. So today we're going to be primarily talking about the grid. There's a couple different ways to sell beef carcasses or beef in general. Some of them are live price, just a carcass price that has nothing to do with value or quality grades. And then what I'm going to be talking about today, which is, this is pulled off of our meat judging grid. So it's kind of a condensed grid. Whenever I'm doing actual carcass pricing for contests, I'll use updated USDA market reports to get some of these base prices. But for pricing, our base is going to be a low choice, which is right in kind of on the left-hand middle side of the top column, our column, low choice yield grade 3. So on this grade, that's $273, and then everything else moves up or down based off of that base. And we'll talk about why and how those prices move up and down based off of yield and quality grades. So in general, you know, there's a lot of different steps that go from that live animal to the carcass. And those retail cuts you see on that right-hand side, that's going to be what's sold at retail. A lot of different value assigned to different cuts, a lot of different value assigned from cuts from one carcass to the next. So understanding why one cut from one carcass is worth more than another, again, that has that downstream effect to the initial carcass, which impacts things like the carcass contest. So beef grading, we consider this to be a dual system. We are going to be determining quality grades, which I'm going to talk about next, and yield grades. So quality grades, those are the USDA Select Choice Prime standard. Those are our 4 for most carcasses, and those are going to be predicting eating experience. So prime being the highest, that would be eliciting the best eating experience you possibly can have, all the way down to standard, which we would consider to be relatively unacceptable in terms of an eating experience standpoint. Yield grades, that's the rows on that grid. That is just cuttability, so yield. How much product are we getting off of that carcass? How much muscling does it have? Does it have too much fat? So we want muscling and we do not want fat. Those are going to positively impact cuttability, positively impacting the yield grades, and both of those kind of balance out to that final price, on top of some other premiums and discounts, which we will talk about as well. So again, 3 main pricing strategies. Today we're going to be talking about grid, which is what I use for carcass contest, because that is the industry standard. You know, you get to choose on how you sell animals. However, grid is what we use for the carcass contest because it takes quality grades into effect, and yield grades and all the other premiums and discounts, which are pretty popular. So quality grades, as I mentioned, these are going to be predicting that eating experience. So this is going to take into account 2 main things, and that is the amount of fat or the amount of marbling inside of our ribeye. So beef carcasses get ribbed at the 12th and 13th rib across the board. That's standard for any planted in the US, it's a little bit different in other countries. You must rib at that exact spot because animals marble differently from the front of the animal to the back of the animal. So we want to make sure that's consistent. And then the amount of marbling tied back in with how old that animal is, because age also impacts eating experience. Younger animals will have a better eating quality than older animals. And by old, I mean over 30 months of age typically. And that balances into our different quality grade buckets. So USDA Prime, USDA Choice, Select, and Standard. That is all determined by a USDA grader and a camera at big packing plants, or just a grader at maybe a small meat processor. Here's an example of what that would look like from Prime on that top left-hand corner to Top Choice. We have a average choice, low choice on that bottom row. We have a high select, a low select, and that right-hand side, we have a standard. So as we move from left to right and from top to bottom, those move in decreasing order of eating experience. So top left-hand rib should have the best eating experience out of anything out of the 7 listed. It would also be worth probably the most money. The other factor here is yield grade. As I just kind of eyeball these all look okay from a yield standpoint. We'll talk about that in a minute. But just from a quality grade standpoint, that carcass would absolutely be worth the most on a per hundredweight basis, which is another, everything we do for pricing in the industry and carcass contests, we always do per hundredweight. Not total value. And we'll just do some examples of that at the end of this presentation. Here's another example of marbling, just to talk about how the marbling has changed in the industry. So over time, I've been really involved in meat judging and meat science world for about 10 years. And when I first started, it was really easy to see a USDA Select, which is that right-hand side of this graph, at any plant. You know, you can go into a plant, 20–30% of carcasses, depending on the time of year, was going to be a Select. That's not going to be what I would consider high quality in terms of eating experience. That's going to be, you know, found at grocery stores, not at a premium price, maybe at some lower end restaurants. Really, you're never going to advertise that you're selling Select. That's not going to be a selling point. Once we get into the choices, again, low choice is like our bare minimum. That's our base. Anything over that is going to be considered high quality or premium. Those are going to be the steaks that you'll find at a high-end restaurant. You're going to pay premium for at the grocery store, or if you're harvesting your own, something that you want out of your own animals. And as time has gone on, now it's hard to find selects. It's really easy to see average choices, low choices, high choices. Something over low prime used to be really hard to find, and now I can go into a plant, especially here in the Midwest, and find average and high prime really right when I walk in. Probably within about 5 minutes of walking into the sales cooler, I can find at least one average or high prime, which again, 10 years ago just wasn't the case. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but that's a good thing. You know, we want high quality beef, and that's, as an industry, a direction that we want to go, which is the whole premise behind the way we price carcasses. And one of the big points we want to make in these carcass contests is that these factors that we look for from a carcass standpoint is positive, and that's good from a beef standpoint. It's good to help increase demand of beef in the United States. Yield grades, this is going to be predicting the amount of usable product as we move from high yielding, it's going to be a yield grade 1, all the way down to low yielding, it's going to be a yield grade 5. We want to say in 1, 2, or 3, which is about 50% usable product off of that carcass. There's going to be a lot of bone waste in all carcasses. We obviously have a kind of standard loss on the kill floor. That's about 64% yield. So we're losing the remaining portion. So out of that, then we have about 50% total of that carcass that can be used for retail cuts once fat is cut off, once bone is cut off. So this is just the amount of meat and muscle that is on that carcass. Here's some examples. Top left hand is going to be yield grade 1, moving to a 2, a 3, bottom 2 are going to be 4s and 5s. Bottom 2 are going to be problems because at a plant that all that has to be cut off. So we were going to discount for fat carcasses because we don't consider it usable product. You can eat fat, of course, but we want the muscle, we want the meat. So the more time a plant spends trimming that carcass down, the less money it's going to be worth because they're losing time essentially to trim that carcass. So initially, or first, whenever we're pricing, I have to determine yield and quality grades. There are math equations for yield grades. quality grades. Either a USDA grader needs to do this or somebody who's done it for quite a bit of time to determine the initial yield and quality. That's going to give you your base price without any other premiums or discounts. However, whenever I'm pricing and in the industry, there are opportunities for these premiums and discounts, which we can add in to that total price. So we're going to breeze through these so I don't take too much time. I kind of have the gift of talking, so I can talk for a long time, which I will try not to. But I'll talk about the more pertinent premiums and discounts. And of course, this is going to be recorded. So if you need these slides or want any more information on any of these premiums or discounts, please ask me questions or reach out in the future. So as we look at premiums, this is going to be things that can be added to that per hundredweight price to add value back to that carcass. The most popular one is going to be CAB, so any type of certified program. However, there's like 115 different certified programs. These are going to be either breed or quality grade based. So basically a set of standards that if carcasses fall into these parameters, they can qualify for these programs. Kind of the big caveat here is not all plants run these programs. CABs basically ran everywhere. You can go to any packing plant and see that they have it. They will run and sell CAB. Some of the other breed programs, not nearly as prominent or popular. And then basically all the big packers will have their own premium programs, their own premium brands. So when you go into the grocery store and you see a certain branding program for that's maybe under the Cargill or Tyson or National Beef, they might have their own premium beef program that fit some parameters for them to be able to be sold at a premium. And that's premium started on the carcass. So if that carcass fit the parameters for that program, then they would get, let's say, an additional $5 per hundredweight. That would be added back to that total value to go back to the producer. So all of these premiums will affect that price that the producer is going to be paid at the end. Discounts are a little bit more exciting, not for the producer, but just to talk about. So we can have carcass bruising. This is going to typically just be $10 per hundredweight, or total loss or total deduction just due to loss of product. Lots of causes, but it's literally just bruising. Usually happens in the feedlot or in the lairage section before waiting for harvest. Weights, we have discounts for weights. This is probably the most common discount we have. We're in an era right now of the biggest carcasses ever. Maybe we're coming a little bit off of that, but last year, the year before, I mean, it was really easy to find 1,100-pound carcasses in the plant, and that is a carcass with a 64% dressing percentage. That's a really big live animal, and that's not uncommon. I mean, I've seen carcasses way bigger than that, 1,300 pounds in some extreme cases. So why do we discount for these big or small carcasses? Well, for one, these plants weren't designed to carry 1,100-pound carcasses. So I've seen entire rails at certain plants fall sometimes just due to weight, right? They were not made for that much weight, so sometimes that can cause issues. Also, they were not made for carcasses that long, so you'll see that sometimes that necks might need to be cut down, or places in the plant have to be modified so carcasses can get around it without touching the ground. So there are logistical things that are problems with big carcasses. Small carcasses on the other side, again, it's kind of similar to the yield. It's more work for someone to break down a 700 or 500-pound carcass versus an 1,100-pound carcass. It's the same time to break that down with less usable product, so they consider it to be less efficient. Both of these also are not eligible for those box beef programs, especially CAB, that has a max of 1,100 pounds on the top end. Old carcasses, as I mentioned, are going to have reduced eating experience. As animals age, they're going to get a little bit tougher, more robust flavor. So we see a deduction in that eating experience for consumers. So once an animal gets over a certain age, based off of, we evaluate age of the carcass, physiological age is what we call it. then they'll get an overall deduction off of that base price, and they will not be eligible to grade USDA Prime, Choice, Select, or Standard. Over 30 months. This one is from a food safety and a quality standpoint. Over 30-month cattle, they are treated differently in the plant due to issues with bovine spongiform encephalopathy or mad cow disease. And so certain things have to be removed off of that carcass to keep the consumer safe. And so that added labor, that adds to the decrease in price. And also we know that animals older, so it also might have some reduction of eating experience as well. Dark cutters and blood splash, which are the next two slides. This is going to be mostly from a consumer standpoint. So not as much of a decrease in eating experience as it is the consumers won't buy it. So if we see those two packages of steaks on that top right-hand corner, consumers will probably not buy the package on the right. They'll buy the package on the left, even if they have the exact same eating experience, or if the package on the right even has more marbling. Consumers do not want dark colored beef. They want bright cherry red colored beef. We know this as someone who did a lot of work with consumers, especially from a color standpoint. Color is hugely impactful on how we purchase meat and how we experience or have an eating experience as well. So dark cutting beef is really mostly a problem from a consumer standpoint. Blood splash, this is caused by on the harvest floor, and it just looks kind of weird. It has absolutely no impact on eating experience, but it will have a speckled appearance on the surface of that ribeye. So because of that, again, it can't really go into normal food chain pathways, so it will get discounted pretty heavily due to that reduction in what we consider a consumer appeal. So how much does the consumer want to buy that ribeye? If it looks exactly like the one on the screen, the answer is they don't want to buy it. So let's run through an example, and then I'll open it up for questions. So again, that base price that I use and that the market reports use is going to be a USDA or USDA low choice yield grade 3. So if I am lower yielding than that, which would be yield grade 4 or 5, you'll see as I move from top to bottom within the low choice column, that price goes down. That's a per hundredweight price. It goes down as for all the reasons I already mentioned. And as I move from prime all the way down to that blood splash dark cutter column on the end, the price goes from high to low. So yield grade 3, prime, 289, all the way down to 237. And that is due to a decrease in that eating experience. So let's look at an example. In this example, I have a prime. So I yield grade 4.1. I changed the example right before I started this. So 4.1, that was over 30 months. Something I did not mention earlier is that the 30-month is going to be determined by teeth, dentition. That was a change in the industry. So now we look at teeth for just the over 30-month. All of the other age is going to be dictated by what we consider the physiological age. So this carcass was not old, it's still graded prime, okay? However, it was over 30 months. So base price here was $293.43. This is the price off of the USDA market report today. I looked it up just before hopping on this call. Prime premium. So again, that's going to be that additional price on top of the base because that carcass was prime, and that was $37.54. It's going to have a discount for a yield. So a yield grade 4 has a discount of $15. And then other things to consider, the 30-month will be a discount. That was a $20 discount. And then weight can be either a discount or nothing. So typically our range in which there's no discount is going to be 600 to about 990, 1,000 pounds. This carcass weighed 919, so it did not have a discount for weight. So essentially, I'll take my base price, add the prime premium, subtract the yield grade discount if there is one, or sometimes there can be a premium if it's a yield grade 1 or 2, and then add or subtract any other premiums. So for this example, I have an over 30-month carcass with a $20 discount. No other premiums or discounts. So the final per hundredweight price is $295.97, which is a relatively good over the base price. So we would consider this carcass to be beneficial that it sold on the grid versus the other pricing strategies because it was over that base price. As I've done carcass contests here in Kansas, I get a lot of questions about why we don't use total value, which I think has been something that's been used in the past. So when you think about this, if I have a 1,200-pound select carcass that has a base price of $270, and then a 900-pound prime carcass with a base price of $320, just rough math there is one carcass definitively worth more total value, and that's the huge select carcass, right? Just because it weighs 1,100 pounds. However, that's not the message we want to send in this contest, or really in the industry, right? We want high quality beef. That's why the premiums exist the way that they do. We don't want everything to be dictated by weight. So if we did total value, it just goes from heaviest to lightest carcass, just because that weight's so influential within the total value. But whenever it comes to this carcass contest, we're trying to teach or reward the carcasses that are more valuable within the industry and also within the consumers, right? And that select carcass will not have the same eating experience as the prime carcass, and so we do not want to reward it just for being a larger animal, essentially. So that's my best explanation I can give as to why I will always use per hundredweight. It's also industry standard whenever we do anything with pricing collegiately for contests or these types of contests. We will always use per hundredweight, never total value. Again, because that's how we see that separation within yield and quality, or that cutability and quality, like we've mentioned this entire presentation. So that's my one example. If you would like to run through more examples, I'm happy to do that as well. But I don't want to run over too much. So with that, I will take any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Byer. At this time, we'll entertain any questions that you have. Feel free to put them in the chat and I will refer those to Dr. Byer. Also know that you can, if you have additional questions after tonight's presentation, Dr. Byer's contact information is there. You're welcome to email her, or you can email those questions to me and I will also get those to her. We are going to post the recording on the Kansas 4-H Animal Science webpage, and so you'll have a chance to go back and look at this presentation again. And then also we'll ask that if Dr. Byer is willing, we will post her slides to that page as well. Any questions this evening? We'll give you all just a minute to let your brains catch up. I know it was a lot of interesting information. We just did an informal survey of our local extension agents to find out how many carcass contests are happening across the state. If you don't have one happening locally and you're interested in getting that started with your extension agent, I would recommend that you visit with them. And I'm sure that Dr. Byer would be willing to help your local agents look at how to put a contest together as well. Okay, so the question that has come in is, what is the highest price per pound hanging weight that you would suggest for a high quality animal? I assume, Addison, that this would be if you are selling meat personally.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So more on the retail pricing, is that?
Yes, retail pricing, correct.
Well, retail pricing kind of sky's the limit. There's a lot of things that go into retail pricing. So, I mean, I would say on average right now, price per pound of like ribeyes is going to be somewhere $16 per pound-ish for something that's choice. So prime is obviously going to be a lot more than that. But really within the past 10 years, the section of the industry that's really boomed is different branding programs. So you can look up packages within like trusted brands that are like 44 Farms and other really popular branding programs like that sell for an astronomical amount per pound. So I don't want to give a good number here on what the limit is because it really depends on the quality and the brand, your consumers' trust in that brand, and it all has to be backed up, right? So if you're selling for from a really pretty penny, then that eating experience needs to correspond to that. So yeah, that's a little bit hard for me because I don't deal a ton in the retail space, but I would say you can charge more with the addition of those branded programs and a really strong consumer base that trusts it. Otherwise, yeah, I
So
would
as
go off of market value.
So as far as direct to consumer pricing, I think maybe that is what she's interested in.
For a prime carcass.
Um, Addison?
Yeah, so I do 4-H calves, and
Oh.
so when I'm selling to my buyer, it's always before the animal is butchered. So, and that's like a month prior, which I know that they're going to be a high quality animal. I've raised them on a specific feed so that they are high quality. And I was just wondering if you knew, like, I think I have a pretty good consumer base,
Okay.
but my I was kind of wondering how you would price that per pound as a whole animal, not cut up. Because that's
Oh,
what I
I
do
see.
before the fair.
And
Okay, so you're selling that. Sorry, go ahead, Kelsey.
and this would be a carcass that you wouldn't know the quality grade on yet.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is tough. I think we do have this is really popular in 2020 when this kind of all came to be more popular within the state. I think we made a good infographic online. Yeah, I think it has some pricing direct options and how much product you're going to get. 'Cause kind of the big thing is going to be how much, how many pounds are you going to get off that carcass? You don't know that quite yet. So I might direct you there. It's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. I usually price just the carcass back to the producer, not the carcass to the consumer. But if you email me, then we can get maybe some conversation going offline, and I can give you some more resources.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have this evening for Dr. Beyer? We have a quiet group, it looks like. Okay, if there are no other questions, we'll go ahead and sign off for the evening. Once again, thank you all for attending this evening. Thank you to Dr. Beyer for providing her expertise. We'll provide the slides and the recording on the Kansas 4-H Animal Science webinar page. And as always, if you have additional questions, be sure to reach out.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.